Interest rates are rising across the world and the economic conditions have worsened.
Today, the FOMC raised its policy interest rate by 0.75 percentage point, and we anticipate that ongoing increases will be appropriate.
The Governing Council unanimously decided to raise the three key ECB rates by 75 basis points.
This is no country for older people, it's no country for younger people, it's no country for working people.
Writing here, the worst is yet to come. What does the worst look like?
Bloomberg has forecasted a 100% chance of a US recession within the next 12 months. Globally, the IMF is predicting declines in economic growth for 2023 across Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, and Latin America. The global economy is on the brink of recession, and should it happen in 2023, no one will be affected more than the millennials. Born between 1981 and 1996, the oldest of the millennials have just entered their 40s, while the youngest are in the latter half of their 20s. This is a generation already marked by lower earnings, fewer assets, and less wealth as compared to the generations which came before them. The average American millennial has experienced slower economic growth since entering the workforce than any other generation in US history. Now, with another recession on the horizon, it's the millennials who once again stand to lose the most. According to US Census data, millennials are trailing each of the three generations which came before them in terms of home ownership rates at the same age. This is a trend which has also been seen in European countries, with millennials having the lowest proportion of homeowners at every age when compared to the generations born between 1930 and 1980. The reason why? Affordability. House prices have been growing at a much faster rate than wages, which has priced many millennials out of the housing market. If we were to travel back in time to 1970, after adjusting for inflation, the median price of an American home would be $185,000. Today, that same home would cost you $309,000. And even though average American incomes have increased by 80% since 1970, they haven't come close to keeping up with inflation, with the price of American goods and services up over 500% since 1970. This has led to a situation where millennials have less of an ability to save money, which in turn has made home ownership increasingly unaffordable. To be clear, the housing affordability crisis isn't one which is unique to the US. This is a crisis affecting millennials worldwide, and it will only worsen with a recession. While house prices tend to decrease in recessions, which on paper would increase housing affordability, a recession in 2023 would come with one very important caveat: higher interest rates. Global central banks have been increasing interest rates in order to reduce inflation. The act of increasing rates is what will ultimately send us into a recession, but we don't know how far rates will rise before that happens. Whenever it becomes irrefutable that we are indeed in a recession, it's very likely that interest rates will be much higher than they are today. Higher rates equal a higher cost of borrowing, meaning it will become more expensive for millennials to get a mortgage to purchase a home. For the millennials who can't afford a home now, that won't change in a recession, even with a decline in house prices. So the generation who are already behind in terms of home ownership will end up falling even further behind. The global cost of living crisis is affecting the pockets of every generation, but according to Wells Fargo, millennials and Gen Z experienced the worst inflation by age between December 2020 and December 2021. Given that inflation has continued to worsen since then, it's not surprising that younger generations are concerned for their financial futures. Deloitte's 2022 Gen Z and Millennial survey revealed that almost half of Gen Z and millennials are living paycheck to paycheck, with the cost of living crisis being both generations' greatest concern. Much of this has to do with the cost of rent. In the US, the median cost of rent has increased by 150% since 1970. In parts of the UK, rent prices have increased by 25% since 2015. Meanwhile, in Ireland, rents have soared by over 80% since 2010. Renting is becoming as costly, if not more costly, than getting a mortgage. But many millennials are forced to rent because of how hard it is to save the money needed to buy a home. In 2021, it was found that nearly 2/3 of millennials had no savings at all, and only 16% had saved more than $10,000. So it's not surprising that nearly a quarter of millennials expect to be renters forever. It's a vicious cycle. You have a generation who are forced to pay increasingly high rents while also trying to save money for increasingly unaffordable homes at a time when inflation is at multi-decade highs, and this will only get worse in a recession. When the US economy entered a recession in 2020 as a result of the pandemic, millennial employment fell by 16%, which was more than both Gen X and baby boomers. Gen Z employment fell by 33%. So it's not unreasonable to assume that in the next recession, the younger generations will again be disproportionately impacted in terms of unemployment. That's a very worrying prospect for millennials. If they become unemployed, how will they pay for their rent, save for a home, or even meet the cost of day-to-day expenses? This is even more worrying for European millennials, because not only have EU rent and house prices increased significantly since 2010, but there's also no end in sight to the European energy crisis, which has been a major contributor to the cost of living. Millennials have perhaps the greatest need for retirement savings as compared to any other generation in history. The World Health Organization has estimated that by 2050, the number of people aged 60 and older worldwide will double to 2.1 billion. Over the same time period, the number of people aged 80 and over is expected to triple. People are living longer, which means millennials will need a lot more money in retirement than previous generations. But saving for retirement is a lot harder nowadays than it was in the past. Millennials aren't in a position where they can rely on their employer to provide for them in retirement, nor can they rely on their government to support them. It's entirely on millennials to save and invest. That's why a 2023 recession could jeopardize the future retirement of many millennials. A 35-year-old millennial who invests $500 per month today at average stock market returns will have $680,000 by age 65. But if that millennial delays investing by just 10 years, then by the same age, they'll only have $275,000, which is 60% lower. Point being, if millennials put investing to the wayside because of a recession, it significantly increases the likelihood that they won't be able to retire comfortably. But for many millennials, investing isn't an option. In 2018, the CFA Institute reported that non-investing millennials had cited low savings, high debt, low financial knowledge, and other priorities like buying a home as being the main reasons for not investing. That was during non-recessionary times, so those responses would look a lot worse during a recession. Millennials have experienced some of the worst economic luck out of any generation in history. The segment of millennials who are now in their early 30s have been hit by both the Great Recession of 08-09 and the global pandemic of 2020. Another recession in 2023 might be the final nail in the coffin for the average millennial's chances of home ownership, wealth creation, or even a comfortable retirement. Even for the younger Gen Z, a recession presents many financial challenges, not least of which is the fact that if Gen Z experiences a recession upon entering the labor market, which could be the case in 2023, it becomes less likely that Gen Z will work for higher paying employers in the future. That's what's known as scarring effects, and it's exactly what happened to millennials after the Great Recession. To somehow suggest that younger generations only have themselves to blame for the financial situation they find themselves in is a suggestion which isn't rooted in reality. The US Federal Reserve has said, and I quote, that millennials do not appear to have preferences for consumption that differ significantly from those of earlier generations. In other words, millennial spending habits are not the root cause of millennial woes. In the words of Sarah Manavis, older generations never actually made smarter decisions than millennials. They were just born in the right place at the right time, lucky enough to be born during a period when housing was actually affordable. Unfortunately for millennials, that streak of bad luck is set to continue. Now that you know about the implications of a 2023 recession for the younger generation, you might be wondering what you can do to protect your financial future. Investing as much as you can, as often as you can, is one of the best ways to create lasting generational wealth. But to invest successfully, you'll need to avoid these 10 mistakes that cost investors a lot of money. Make sure this video is next up on your watch list, and I'll see you over there.